Hamas releases 3 Israeli detainees in the 5th batch of the exchange agreement. The second phase of Hamas and Israeli detainee exchange begins after Netanyahu's return from Washington. And Egypt reaffirms commitment to the Gaza ceasefire, rejects forced displacement, and supports Palestinian unity. Hello there, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock Cairo local time and you're watching Q News. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. Hamas has announced the release of 3 Israeli detainees as part of the 5th batch of the first phase of the detainee exchange and Gaza ceasefire agreement. The Israeli army confirmed receiving Eli Sharabi, Ohad Ben Amir, and Or Levy after Hamas freed them in Deir al-Balah, Gaza. In return, Israel released a group of Palestinian detainees under the terms of the agreement. Meanwhile, one of the released Israeli captives has urged the Israeli government to begin talks for the second phase of the ceasefire deal, signaling the possibility of further negotiations. A bus carrying a group of freed Palestinian detainees has arrived in Ramallah after their release from Israel's Offa prison as part of the ongoing ceasefire agreement. Under the deal, Israel has agreed to release 183 Palestinian detainees, including 18 serving life sentences and 54 with high sentences. The list also includes 111 detainees from Gaza arrested after October 7, 2023. Israeli media has reported that Phase 2 of the detainee exchange deal between Hamas and Israel will begin after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu returns from Washington and the cabinet convenes. Netanyahu hinted at war if Hamas remains in Gaza and the deal falters. The US reportedly supports Israeli military action if Hamas violates the agreement or negotiations fail. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ati has reaffirmed Egypt's commitment to stabilizing the ceasefire and ensuring the full implementation of its 3 phases. In a phone call with Portuguese Foreign Minister Paulo Rangel, Abdel Ati stressed that any post-war plans for Gaza must maintain Palestinian unity and include the return of the Palestinian Authority to the Strip. He also rejected any forced displacement of Palestinians during the early recovery and reconstruction phase. Now we go to some live pictures of the new president of Lebanon, Prime Minister.
Being a harmonized team committed with the ministerial solidarity, and I would like to reiterate that the diversity of the government members won't be a source of to disrupt its work, and that the government shouldn't be in a space of narrowed conflicts and clashes, but for the constructive joint work. And I know that the term of this government is limited, but the people's sufferings and their needs aren't measures with the government. Therefore, and I'm very determined to establish the main elements of salvation and reform, and with the full collaboration with His Excellency Mr. President in establishing the principles to launch a new construction workup that we've no time to, and we should work in time.
That's the Prime Minister designate of Lebanon, speaking there in Beirut. Now, US President Donald Trump has said that he is not in a hurry to implement his plan to take control of Gaza and redevelop it. Speaking alongside Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, Trump affirmed that the US does not need to deploy ground troops in Gaza. Palestinians who were forcibly displaced to southern Gaza are now returning to their devastated homes in Gaza City and the north after more than 15 months of war. Israel's destruction of infrastructure aimed to force migration, but instead Palestinians remain determined to stay on their land. Meanwhile, Egypt has strongly condemned Israel's irresponsible and unacceptable statements calling for a Palestinian state to be established on Saudi territory. These remarks, which directly undermine Saudi sovereignty, blatantly violate international law and the UN Charter. In a statement, Egypt reaffirmed that Saudi Arabia's security and sovereignty are red lines. It described the Israeli comments as reckless, a breach of diplomatic norms, and an affront to Palestinian rights, urging the international community to denounce such provocations. Now we'll cross over to the newsroom for more on Gaza with Selma.
Thank you, Mark. And for further analysis on the situation in Gaza as the fifth batch in the first phase of the detainee swaps takes place, we're joined from Cairo by Al Ahram newspaper managing editor Ashraf Al Ashri. Mr. Ashraf, thank you so much for joining us on Qnews. And let me first start by asking you, how significant is this latest detainee exchange in the broader context of the ceasefire agreement?
Certainly what happened today that it might lead to a great desire of Hamas to move forward in executing the first phase. We've already arrived in the fifth batch, and later on 183 Palestinian prisoners will be released, and it seems in fact that the desire from Hamas to move forward to execute the deal. But the dilemma is at Tel Aviv is going to implement by sending and their envoy to Al-Doha, and I doubt it, as Netanyahu's desire not to hinder the execution of the second and the third phases, as he has a plan and to prolong the first phase instead of waiting for the second and the third by requesting the exiting the Hamas in the first phase, or is going to hinder the negotiations. And to respond to these Israelis' commitment with full rejections, and we should wait upon the return of Netanyahu, as Netanyahu's desire is to release the whole captives and go back to the war, and others, members of the far-wing right in the Israeli government. Hence, it will be in a big dilemma, as particularly Netanyahu is returning back of a basket of gift from Trump, and he wishes to hinder the negotiation to make things and matters are more complicated.
Now, as we approach the second phase of the negotiations, what are the main obstacles to implementing it?
Going to be in a very difficult phase. It will be facing great obstacles in implementing this phase, and Netanyahu's already implicitly talked about it, particularly through his talks negotiations with the Likud party. These negotiations may Hamas present and a big list of the senior personalities such as Marwan al-Barouti and of the great weight in the Israeli prisoners. Netanyahu, before the pressures of the far wing, might be avoid to respond to Hamas demands. And I think that the pressure of the far wing will play a great role to make Netanyahu to abide within hard conditions. And I think the second and the third phases will be very difficult, and it's going to come out and to find a light without any pressure from the United States, as said by Wittkov, to put the pressure on Israel to move forward for the second and the third phases.
Speaking of the United States, and you've mentioned Netanyahu's visit to Washington and his relationship with Trump, how might this visit influence the exchange deal?
The weight of the U.S. involvement in the region is good and constructive, but this matter wouldn't be related to the deal exchange or the exchange deal that only, but you need to focus to promote the Trump's proposals of displace the Palestinian that is confronted by a strong rejection by Egypt, the Palestinians, the whole Arabs, the international community, with the exception of Israel and the USA. So the US should continue to, in light of the Arab and the Egyptian stance in this matter, will be facing great difficulties in to be implemented, and then Netanyahu will resort to be reluctant to execute the political settlement regarding the deal, or even the two-state solutions, or to pave the way for the peace process in the upcoming period. So the matter is going to be difficult, as there is some sort of inaction in the Israeli scenes. In addition to the strong Arab stance in Egypt and Saudi Arabia regarding the normalization to Israeli part, unless we should face a great response by Egypt, indicating that the remarks of the Israeli elements to the displacement of the Palestinian people. So
now, sir, sorry for cutting in, but I have to ask you about a recent statement by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said that his country is ready to resume war against Hamas. What are the chances of this, and how do you foresee
Very much expected. Summeric is pressuring Ben Gvir says that he won't go back to the coalition unless the deal will be halted and an Israeli occupation of Gaza. And I think Netanyahu will be respond to the far-wing exploitation due to the pressure of Ben Gvir and to practice pressures on Hamas and creating pretexts of Hamas and the Palestinians in order to resume the military aggressions against Gaza, which is a great expectation about it, as his main purpose is to maintain his coalition to avoid the accountability of the financial corruption that he's going to face.
From Cairo, that was Al Ahram newspaper managing editor, Mr. Ashraf Al Ashri. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews and for all the information you provided us with. And now we're going to move back to Mark in the studio.
Thank you very much, Selma. Now, the United States has approved a potential $6.75 billion arms sale to Israel, including a $660 million deal for Hellfire missiles. The Pentagon confirmed that the State Department approved the sale, emphasizing that all Middle East-related decisions are made by President Trump in line with U.S. strategic interests. For the 19th consecutive day, Israeli forces continue their assault on Jenin and its refugee camp, killing 25 Palestinians and injuring dozens. Israeli troops raided several villages in the province, arresting 3 Palestinians in Yamun and 2 in Yabad. In Jenin city, forces seized a vehicle, assaulted its passengers, and demolished homes and properties in Al-Hadaf and Wadi Bakin neighborhoods. The Palestinian Health Ministry reports that 26 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza over the past 48 hours. Among them, 22 bodies were recovered from the rubble, while 5 others were wounded. This brings the total death toll since October 7th, 2023 to 48,181, with 111,638 injured. The ministry warns that many victims remain trapped under debris, with rescue teams unable to reach them. Israeli forces have withdrawn from Tamun, southeast of Tubas, after 7 days of siege. The town's mayor confirmed that displaced Palestinians have begun returning to their homes. However, the Israeli incursion left significant destruction to public and private properties. The Israeli occupation forces have stormed Balata refugee camp east of Nablus in the occupied West Bank. According to the Palestinian news agency, the forces entered the camp from its southern and northern entrances, deploying in various alleyways and surrounding buildings. Additionally, Israeli bulldozers demolished a street inside the camp and sent new military reinforcements toward Tulkarm. Hamas has condemned U.S. sanctions on the International Criminal Court, the ICC, saying they reward Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government while undermining justice for victims. Hamas urged Rome Statute signatory nations to take concrete steps to uphold international law and protect global stability. ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan was the first official to be affected by U.S. sanctions imposed by Donald Trump. Reuters reported that Khan's name reportedly appears in an unpublished annex of Trump's executive order issued last Thursday, which freezes assets in the U.S. and restricts travel for affected individuals and their families. A coalition of 79 nations has voiced support for the International Criminal Court, the ICC, warning that US sanctions threaten global justice and weaken international law. The countries, which make up nearly two-thirds of the ICC's member states, condemned any attempt to undermine the court's independence. The International Criminal Court is the world's first permanent and independent tribunal dedicated to prosecuting war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and crimes of aggression. Established in 2002 under the Rome Statute, the court operates from The Hague in the Netherlands and plays a critical role in holding individuals accountable for the most serious offences under international law. Now from the ICC to Lebanon, and Lebanon's former Prime Minister Najib Mikati has renewed his call for the complete Israeli withdrawal from occupied southern Lebanon by February the 18th. In a meeting with US Deputy Special Envoy for the Middle East, Morgan Otagus, in Beirut, Mikati also demanded an end to Israel's systematic destruction of southern villages and urged the implementation of UN Resolution 1701. He stressed that complying with international law is key to regional stability. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has met with the newly appointed Prime Minister-designate Nawaf Salem at Babda Palace to discuss the latest consultations regarding government formation. The meeting concluded with an agreement to continue talks to speed up the process, where Salem, who was tasked with forming a new government over 3 weeks ago, left the palace without making a statement. And that's almost all we have time for, but here's what we've been covering. Hamas releases 3 Israeli detainees in the 5th batch of exchange agreement. The second phase of Hamas-Israel detainee exchange begins after Netanyahu's return from Washington. And Egypt reaffirms commitment to the Gaza ceasefire, rejects forced displacement, and supports Palestinian unity. And that's all for our news bulletin this hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEGY to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.